The sky over New Dakar was a permanent shade of rust, colored by the fine metallic dust that filtered through the thin atmosphere like poison glitter. Enormous spires of the Earth Coalition's mining rigs stretched upward like the fingers of a drowning god, clawing at the void above. It was never quiet. The grind of machinery, the bark of foremen, the distant roar of departing dropships, it all blended into a constant, low-frequency rumble that settled into the bones like a second heartbeat. Dr. Kaela Monroe stood at the edge of the landing platform, wind whipping her black coat like a banner of dissent. Her boots were dusted with iron and defiance. Behind her, the shuttle hissed as it folded its wings and powered down. No fanfare, no welcome committee, just another exile returning to Earth. She adjusted the strap of her bag and walked forward alone. The Port Authority was half buried in sand, manned by a disinterested pair of guards who didn't even glance up from their console screens. One of them, a thin man with permanent oil stains on his sleeves, gave her a dismissive grunt. "Name?" he asked, though the retinal scan had already identified her. "Dr. Kaela Monroe," she replied, voice clipped, eyes sharp. The guard smirked. "You don't look like much of a doctor." "Good," she said, brushing past. "I'm not here to heal." The air inside the dome was slightly cooler, filtered through overworked carbon scrubbers. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere was tense. Dock workers, soldiers, and technocrats moved with the hurried, stuttering rhythm of a people surviving rather than thriving. Earth, once a cradle of civilization, now served as the Dominion's labor pool and cannon fodder depot. Kaela moved through the crowd with purpose. Her name still carried a bit of weight here, if only because of the scandal. The brilliant physicist who had stood before a Serathi high science tribunal and called their laws of space-time laughably simplistic. The human who had dared to suggest that their math was elegant but incomplete. The heretic, the exile. Her old lab sat on the edge of the city, buried under layers of bureaucracy and resentment. She keyed in her access code, surprised, frankly, that it still worked, and stepped into the cold, dim interior. The air smelled of ozone and dust. Equipment sat dormant, like loyal pets waiting for a master who never returned. She dropped her bag and touched the console. Lights flickered. Systems came online. Holographic interfaces bloomed in the air with soft chimes. "You came back," a voice said behind her. Kaela turned. It was Tanak, her former assistant. Older now, his synthetic eye glowing faintly in the dark. "I never really left," she replied. He stepped closer, cautious but curious. "After what they did to you, you're either stupid or stubborn." "Both," she said, "but mostly I saw the news." "The rift." Tanak frowned. "They're saying it's tearing space apart near Hirata Prime. A Serathi science vessel was lost trying to map it. They sent in a second one. Came back with the crew fused to the walls." Kaela nodded. "I believe it." Tanak hesitated. "You think your theories apply?" "I know they do," she said, stepping around him and pulling up a three-dimensional simulation of the rift. It pulsed like a living thing, constantly shifting, unpredictable, beautiful. "This isn't a tear in space. It's something else. Something alive. Something testing us." "Testing," he echoed, voice tight. Kaela turned to him. "Yes, and the Serathi can't solve it. Their science is too rigid, too hierarchical. They can't think sideways. And you can?" Tanak asked. "No," she said with a half-smile. "But I can build a team who can." He watched her, the old admiration fighting with new doubt. "They won't let you. Earth is still just a weapons depot to them." "They don't need to let me," she replied, already pulling up encrypted channels. "I don't need permission. I need minds, untrained ones. People who haven't been told what's impossible." "You want to use civilians?" "I want to use humans," she said. "Not Serathi-washed lab rats. Real thinkers. Artists. Soldiers who improvise. Engineers who tinker. People who dream in sideways logic." Tanak sighed. "That's insane." "It's necessary," she said. A moment passed in silence, the soft hum of the lab filling the void. Finally, Tanak nodded. "Then I guess I'm in." Kaela smiled just barely. "Welcome back." The message came 2 days later. A corrupted Serathi probe had crashed on Europa. The transmission was fragmented, but the data recovered showed anomalies in gravitational constants. Within the rift, physics behaved like fiction. Time moved in loops. Sound was visual. Thought warped matter. It was everything Kaela had warned about. And the Serathi? They doubled down on protocol. Deemed the rift a containment anomaly. Declared it off limits. Began preparing military responses. Kaela knew the pattern. Fear leads to control. Control leads to failure. So she sent out her own call, encrypted underground, whispered through pirate satellites and repurposed AIs. To those who see beauty in chaos, to those who were told they think wrong, to those who've built machines from scrap and drawn galaxies on napkins. I have a ship. I have a plan. I have a rift to explore. Join me. She leaned back in chair, watching the first responses trickle in. Names. Coordinates. A former mech pilot from Mars. A neurodivergent linguist. A street artist who once hacked a Serathi drone swarm to spell poetry in the sky. Misfits. Outsiders. Her kind of people. The rift had opened. Now it was Earth's turn to step through. The meeting place was a half-dismantled cargo freighter turned underground haven, tucked beneath the Martian ice shelf like a secret waiting to be told. They called it the Belly, though no one remembered why. Maybe it was because it felt like being swallowed by something bigger than you. Maybe it was just dark humor from people who'd spent too long living under red skies and empty promises. Kaela stood at the front of the chamber, surrounded by rusting consoles, flickering lights, and the buzz of barely functional life support systems. Before her stood a dozen strangers. Ragged, curious, skeptical. None of them looked like saviors. That was the point. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice amplified through the cracked speaker, looped around her neck. "You weren't chosen for what you know, but for how you think." A muscular man with a cybernetic arm scoffed. "You pulled me off a smuggling route for a philosophy lecture?" Kaela didn't flinch. "No. I pulled you because you once rerouted an entire fleet by rewriting a navigation algorithm in real time using a broken datapad and your pinky. That shut him up." She moved on. "The Serathi have failed. Their probes disappear. Their ships return wrong. The rift doesn't follow their laws. It doesn't follow any laws, but it does respond. React. Morph." She brought up a projection, fuzzy footage from the crashed Europa probe. A landscape where rivers flowed into the sky and shadows moved independently of their sources. Gravity pulsed like a heartbeat. Time flickered. Gasps rippled through the room. "This is not just a tear," she said. "It's not an enemy or a weapon. It's a question. And the Serathi don't know how to ask the right kind." A small voice spoke up. Alex, a neurodivergent coder with lenses over both eyes, each flickering with shifting data streams. "What kind of question?" Kaela met her gaze. "The kind you answer with imagination. With empathy. With contradiction." The smuggler, Tren, she now recalled, crossed his arms. "That's not science." "No," Kaela said, "it's humanity." The ship they'd retrofitted for the mission had once been a Serathi transport vessel, half blown apart in a failed mining revolt. Now it bore a new name, stenciled crudely onto the hull: the Paradox. Its insides were a hybrid of Earth ingenuity and Serathi over-engineering. Where once there were sterile corridors, now graffiti bled across walls. Maps of dreams and diagrams of the impossible. The main interface was rebuilt to run off intuitive gesture and voice, tied to neural bandwidth controllers that adapted in real time to emotional states. Pure madness to a Serathi. Pure poetry to Kaela. In the ship's core, Tanek oversaw calibration of the spatial dampeners. "This thing's gonna fall apart the second we hit dimensional flux," he muttered. Kaela nodded, running diagnostics alongside him. "Probably." He gave her a look. "You're not even pretending to be confident?" She grinned. "I'd rather be honest than reassuring." He grunted. "You haven't changed." "Neither has the Dominion," she shot back. The launch was unsanctioned. Off-grid. A violation of at least 17 Serathi interstellar codes. Which meant, of course, it was perfect. As they approached the rift, the Paradox's sensors began to stutter. Time lost consistency. Data duplicated itself, looped, rewrote. The crew began experiencing déjà vu in unison. Words appeared on wall panels none of them had typed. Kaela stood in the observation dome, staring at the rift, if you could call it that. It wasn't a hole or a tear. It was a bloom, a luminous, ever-shifting lattice of color and form that defied dimension. "It's listening," whispered Alex beside her. "How do you know?" Kaela asked. "I don't," she replied, eyes wide. "But it feels like it is." Tanek's voice crackled through comms. "We're at entry threshold. Final call." Kaela turned to her crew, misfits and wonders, all of them. "You all volunteered, knowing this might be a one-way trip. I won't lie, it probably is. But if we do this right, we won't just be the first humans to explore this thing. We'll be the first beings to understand it. We can rewrite our place in the universe. Or we can vanish." Tren smirked. "Hell of a sales pitch." "Then let's make history," Kaela said. The paradox surged forward. Entry wasn't an explosion. It was a folding. 1 second they were in space, engines humming, stars in the distance. The next, they were inside something else. Kaela blinked. The walls were gone, or transparent, or symbolic. Around them stretched a space that wasn't a space, filled with inverted light, architecture formed from echoes, colors that seemed to react to thought. The crew gasped. Tren dropped to a knee, clutching his skull. "Too much noise," he groaned. "Like my brain's on fire." "Shield your thoughts," Alex said urgently, pulling up her neural filter. "It's responding to mental output." Kaela activated her own cognitive dampener. Immediately, the chaos lessened. The space around them dimmed, stabilized. "We're being interpreted," she murmured. "It's rendering us as readable objects." "It thinks in metaphor," Alex said. "Literal mechanics don't work here." Kaela looked at the horizon, a horizon that tilted and shimmered, where cause and effect danced like lovers in reverse. "We're not in the Dominion anymore," she whispered. And somehow she smiled. The laws broke down the further they went. Not all at once. No, that would have been a mercy. Instead, reality peeled back in layers, like a fevered mind slowly unraveling itself in public. Time didn't stop. It just started multiplying. Kaela was the first to notice it. She was speaking to Alex, asking her to adjust the ship's localized mass field, when she turned and saw herself still mid-sentence from a moment earlier. Her echo self, flickering slightly, mouthing the words in the same breath she had just spoken. Everyone in the bridge froze. Tanek turned pale. "We're splitting into time shadows." Kaela nodded slowly. "Temporal overlap. Like recursive echoes of ourselves. And if the echoes start acting on their own?" Tren asked. Kaela didn't respond. They passed a Serathi ship on the third rotation. At least, it had once been Serathi. Now it hung in the knot space like a corpse stitched from wrong geometry. Angles that shouldn't meet, hull plating that bled upwards into fractal spines. The ship looked as though it had tried to fold itself into a thought and failed spectacularly. "Scanning," Tanek whispered. "No," Kaela snapped. "No logic-based scans. You'll provoke it." Tanek froze mid-command. "What the hell does that mean?" Kaela stared at the dead vessel. The rift hates predictability. The more we try to measure it like a machine, the more violently it pushes back. "Then how do we learn anything?" asked Tren, tension rising. "By feeling," Alex said softly, her irises flickering like twin moons. "It's like a story trying to write itself through us." Kaela glanced at her. "Exactly." They moved on, deeper into the bloom. The further they ventured, the less physical space made sense. The corridor to the medbay now looped through the cargo hold. Rooms changed position. One moment Kaela stood on a catwalk overlooking the engine core. The next, she found herself in the galley, staring at a bowl of synthetic soup that shimmered with stars. No alarms went off. No announcements played. The ship simply bent to the rift's will. Tren kept notes the old way, pen and paper, but even his handwriting started slipping, curling into symbols he didn't recognize. "It's not me writing anymore," he muttered. Tanek tried building an anti-distortion field. It collapsed within seconds, rebounding into an infinite mirror loop that trapped him in his own error message for an hour. Kaela began to suspect that the rift wasn't just distorting reality. It was studying them. 3 days in, or what passed for days inside the rift, they found the crew of the missing Serathi research ship, or what was left of them. They floated just outside an event pocket, suspended in zero-G but frozen mid-motion. Their bodies had merged with their tools, with the walls, with each other. One scientist's face emerged from the console like a sculpture half-finished, mouth open in eternal scream. Another's limbs branched like roots into a control interface, skin fused with wires. Alex threw up. Trend stared in stunned silence. Kaela, jaw tight, approached the lead researcher's core log, which floated nearby, intact but flickering. She gestured on. A Serathi voice stuttered into life, fractured by loops and interruptions. System integrity, compromised cognitive map regression, initiated crew cohesion failing, data is corrupt. The rift is not a void. It is a mirror. Kaela shut it off. The crew floated back in silence. The image of the fused bodies burned into their minds. Tanek broke the silence. We shouldn't be here. No, Kaela agreed. But we haven't broken. Not yet. Why not? Kaela turned slowly. Because we stopped trying to win and started trying to listen. In the heart of the paradox, Kaela began experiments. Not with instruments, but with meaning. She invited Alex to build visual language maps based on dreams. She asked Trent to recall childhood fears and manifest them in sculpture. She even asked Tanek to compose non-functional code, programming that did nothing except feel a certain way. The rift responded. The walls pulsed with color. Rooms stabilized. Time loops slowed. Kaela theorized that the rift had no center. No core. No engine. It was reactive narrative geometry, a space that reshaped itself based on the consciousness of those within it. Serathi science failed because it insisted on logic. Human success came from contradiction, chaos, and curiosity. It's not a place, Kaela whispered in a private log. It's a conversation. Then came the storm. Not meteorological, but existential. A sudden pulse swept through the paradox like a shriek in the dark. Lights burst. Gravity flipped. The crew was tossed through collapsing spaces as the ship reeled in pain. Kaela clung to a railing as corridors twisted. She saw Tren vanish mid-scream. Tanek floated upside down in a hallway that spun like a Mobius strip. Alex was already bracing for it, somehow predicting the shift, and pulled Kaela into a mental stabilization loop through their neural links. Stability is illusion. The ship's interface screamed in a corrupted burst. Kaela's vision blurred. Her thoughts tried to exit her skull. Symbols appeared on her skin, glowing equations written in emotion instead of math. And then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. They were elsewhere. A garden. A real one. Trees with glass leaves. Rivers that flowed upward. The sky was a child's painting of a sunset. And standing in the distance, observing them with infinite patience, was a figure made of light and absence. It didn't move, didn't threaten, just watched. The crew gathered, silent and awed. Kaela stepped forward. I think this is it, she said quietly. The center. Tanek glanced at the figure. That thing. No, Kaela said, a slow wonder dawning in her voice. Us. Velith stood beneath the council spire, gazing up at the needle-thin tower that pierced the sky like a judgment. The Serathi High conclave chambers resided at its apex, a place where no human had ever stood, and few dared speak truth. It was a monolith of certainty, of law, of order. And now it was cracking, quietly, internally like a dying star. The rift had become a plague of questions the Dominion couldn't silence. Entire fleets had failed to return. Core worlds near Hirata Prime suffered power outages and communications blackouts, systems crashing under the weight of paradoxical interference. The Serathi public was being told it was a containment fluctuation, but the whispers were growing. And with them, something worse, fear. Velith adjusted his diplomatic robes and stepped into the lift, ascending toward the storm of voices above. In the conclave chamber, the heads of 17 core species flared in varying colors, sounds, and scents as they argued across dimensions. The Serathi, the oldest and most rigid of them, held the floor. "This rift is a weapon," hissed Archon Varax, his forearms folded in calculated disdain. "Perhaps from beyond known space. Perhaps even human-made." Murmurs echoed through the chamber. "Always the humans. Always the scapegoat." Velith stepped forward. "With respect, Archon, we have no evidence to support that claim." Virax sneered. "No evidence yet. But consider their nature. Volatile, short-lived, obsessively imaginative. Who else would tamper with forces they don't understand?" Velith bowed his head, the gesture equal parts tradition and concealment. He had once believed the same, had written off humanity as an evolutionary quirk, functional, occasionally useful, but ultimately irrelevant to the grand design of the Dominion. Then he saw the footage. It had been intercepted by a border-monitoring drone, a hidden relay Kaela hadn't accounted for. The images were raw, non-linear, but unmistakable. A human ship deep within the rift. Surviving, adapting, thriving. Kaela Monroe's face, surrounded by impossible geometries, her voice narrating theories the Serathi had dismissed as heresy. Her crew, diverse, chaotic, creative, working in tandem where elite Dominion scientists had been devoured by their own logic loops. Velith had watched it over and over, fascinated and horrified. The footage wasn't just proof of human resilience. It was proof of Dominion failure. "I have seen what the humans are doing inside the rift," Velith said to the council now. "They are succeeding where we have failed, because they think differently." Virax slammed a clawed fist against the armrest. "They are unstructured, undisciplined, chaos incarnate." "Exactly," Velith replied, lifting his head, his voice steady. "And perhaps that is precisely what the rift responds to." The chamber went still. Another counselor, this one from the translucent-faced Aurelian caste, pulsed in cautious agreement. "Our science has always prized clarity, precision. But what if the rift is not a puzzle, but a language?" Velith nodded. "And humanity, flawed as they are, may be the only species capable of speaking it." Meanwhile, on Earth, the Serathi's quiet disdain was shifting into active hostility. A Serathi war fleet had entered orbit. Officially, it was for observation and protection. Unofficially, it was a threat. Back in Nudikar, Earth Coalition officials fumbled to appease both their alien overseers and the rising panic of their people. Rumors swirled about the paradox, some calling Kaela a hero, others branding her a traitor. A protest exploded outside the Serathi embassy complex. Tear gas and pulse rounds scattered the crowd, but not before someone set fire to a Serathi diplomat transport. The flames turned the sky green. Velith watched the footage from his private quarters, his expression unreadable. He had been raised to believe the Serathi were guardians of order, that they had tamed the stars with their intellect and restraint. But now that restraint had become stagnation, their systems were elegant but brittle, their hierarchy absolute but blind, and the Rift had no interest in their titles or calculations. He opened a secure comms channel. Hacked, of course, and absolutely forbidden. The signal bounced through black market relays, passed through neutral systems, piggybacked on human trading routes. Finally, it reached the paradox. Kaela stared at the message for a long time before saying anything. It was simple, a single line. They are preparing to destroy the Rift. You must act before they do. Velith. Alex leaned in. Is it real? Kaela nodded. Oh, it's real. Tanak cursed. They're going to kill us all just to keep their image intact. No, Kaela said. They're going to kill the idea of us. That's more dangerous to them than the Rift itself. Tren leaned against the wall, eyes closed. So what now? We run. Kaela turned to the viewport. The Rift shimmered beyond, alive with the weight of thought and transformation. No, she said. We go deeper. Back in the conclave, Velith made his final play. I propose a radical solution, he said. We send a delegation of human and Serathi scientists into the Rift together. Birax howled. Heretical. Necessary. Velith snapped back, more fire in his voice than any had ever heard. You can destroy the Rift, yes. But if you do, you erase not just a threat, but a lesson. A chance. The chamber descended into chaos. arguments, threats, legal motions, and ancient oaths invoked. But among the youngest voices, the least powerful yet most curious, a ripple of agreement began. And far away, on a ship built from scrap and intuition, Kaela Monroe smiled into the unknown. The center of the rift wasn't a place. Not really. It was more like a moment, folded and stretched until it could contain an entire space. Inside it, the paradox no longer moved through vacuum or coordinates. Instead, it drifted along in tension, guided by a patchwork crew who were learning to feel their way through unreality. Kaela sat cross-legged in the observation dome, eyes half closed, surrounded by floating instruments that no longer functioned in traditional ways. Alex sat across from her, hands resting lightly on her knees, each of her ocular implants flickering with untranslatable glyphs. "We're close," Alex said softly. "How do you know?" Kaela asked. "I don't," Alex replied. But the ship dreamed it again. The glass garden, the figure of light. It's pulling us in. The garden again. It had shown itself to several crew members now. Different versions, different interpretations, like a myth retold through different minds. Tren saw it as a battlefield, littered with weapons that hummed like lullabies. Tanek saw it as a library where books rearranged themselves based on mood. Kaela had seen it too, a field of starlight. Her mother waiting there, face unreadable. As they descended, or maybe ascended, into the rift's core, the laws of relativity simply let go. Distance and memory bent around them like thread. Communication became partial, experiential. They spoke in overlapping metaphors. Alex described navigation in terms of feeling for music. Tren began dreaming in numbers and awoke with engine improvements scribbled on the walls. The paradox adapted alongside them. Its corridors grew more fluid, shifting as needed, not in defiance of physics, but in alignment with meaning. A doorway became a spiral staircase because Kaela was thinking about childhood. A console reshaped itself into a kinetic sculpture because Alex was visualizing probability as motion. Every action resonated through the rift, and the rift responded in kind. One night, if night could even be measured, Kaela found herself standing in what looked like an endless hallway of mirrors. Except the reflections didn't show her. They showed possibilities. In one, she was still at the Serathi Science Academy, bowing before the tribunal, apologizing. In another, she had never been exiled at all. In a third, she never went into science. She was tending bar in a gravity dive on Titan, laughing too loud. In all of them, the rift remained unexplored. She turned away. When she exited the corridor, Alex was waiting. "You saw it?" Alex asked gently. Kaela nodded. "It wanted me to see who I could have been." Alex tilted her head. "I think it's trying to understand us. Not just what we know, but what we choose." The breakthrough came 3 shifts later in the form of pain. Tanek collapsed mid-repair, screaming, clutching his head. A shard of memory, no one else's but his, began projecting into the air above him. A looped scene, Tanek arguing with his brother before his death, guilt dripping from every frame. The rift was digging deeper now. It wanted more than science or curiosity. It wanted truth. Kaela pulled him from the projection with sheer force of will. The image broke apart like glass in 0G, fading into light. When he woke, he was pale, shaking, but lighter. "It showed me everything I try to forget," he said, "and it let me go." Kaela looked around at the crew, everyone silently watching. "This place is a crucible," she said. "It's not just warping physics, it's testing our identity." Tren crossed his arms. "You think it's alive?" "I think it's aware. Of us. Of the way we are," Kaela said. "The contradictions. The grief and wonder and chaos. The Dominion doesn't survive things like this because it doesn't allow uncertainty." Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "But we're made of it." They reached the center not with engines, but with acceptance. It happened all at once. The paradox stopped. No resistance, no deceleration. Just stillness. Outside, the void rippled into a dream of color. Not metaphor this time. Not projection. This was real, or as real as anything could be here. The garden again. This time they all saw it. Glass leaves tinkled like wind chimes. Water spiraled into the sky, not in defiance of gravity, but because gravity had agreed to do something else for a while. At the center stood the figure. Light and dark, matter and story. It looked at them, and through them. Kaela stepped forward. "I don't know what you are," she said, "but I know what we are. We're broken. We're creative. We're inconsistent. And that's why we made it this far." No response. Only reflection. Then motion. The figure touched the air, and the garden fractured. Not shattered. Fractured, like a geode revealing crystal. Inside was a construct. Massive. Ancient. Designed not by hands, but by idea. A lattice of memory and probability, threaded through with logic and myth. A machine that wasn't a machine. Kaela fell to her knees. "It's not a rift," she whispered. "It's a mind. An archive. Or a being." Alex stepped forward. "Not dead. No. Dormant. Until now." Tanek stood slowly. "So why wake up for us?" Kaela looked back at her crew, eyes wide with understanding. "Because we're the first ones messy enough to qualify." Inside the crystalline machine, time stopped pretending to be linear. Each crew member experienced their own trial. Kaela faced her tribunal again, but this time, she refused to apologize. Tren confronted a battlefield littered with people he'd failed and laid his weapons down. Alex walked through every dream she'd ever suppressed and came out laughing. When they emerged, their bodies were unchanged, but their presence shimmered with something new. Permission. The rift had opened, not to devour, but to share. Kaela touched a panel of living thought. Information flowed. Images. Equations that felt like lullabies. The entire history of a species who had lived and become the rift, long before the Dominion ever carved borders into the stars. "They weren't destroyed," she murmured. "They evolved." Back aboard the Paradox, the ship realigned. Systems stabilized. The rift quieted. And far away, on the edge of Serathi space, a dozen Dominion monitors blinked red as the rift's energy levels began to drop. Not in collapse, but in resolution. Kaela stood on the bridge, eyes wet. "We did it," Tren said. "No," she said softly. "We understood it. That's better." The moment the rift began to stabilize, the Dominion panicked. Energy readings across Hirata Prime's border space spiked, and the artificial gravity wells used to monitor the rift's expansion started reporting anomalies, none of which made sense to the Serathi High Conclave. One moment, the rift was growing, pulsing like a star in labor. The next, it was listening, breathing, changing, and all of it was centered around a single unsanctioned ship of humans who were supposed to have no right, no authority, no capability to touch what lay beyond known physics. So they decided, in their usual logic-bound way, that if they could not understand it, they would destroy it. The order was issued. Initiate Protocol Purge 7. Cleanse the anomaly. A fleet of 17 Dominion warships was dispatched. Not research vessels. Not diplomats. Warships. Back aboard the Paradox, Kaela felt the first tremor before the sensors confirmed it. A low-frequency wave of dread, followed by a tremble in the walls that felt like the rift itself shuddering in grief. Tren rushed into the control room. "They're coming." Serathi fleet, full military configuration. 30 minutes out. Alex's lenses flashed. Confirmed. Weapons locked. Target the rift. Tanek gritted his teeth. "They're going to wipe it. Along with us." Kaela stared out the viewport, at the shimmering construct in the rift's center. The intelligence, the archive, the story being, they'd only just begun to understand it. And now, the Serathi meant to burr it out of existence. "They're afraid," she said quietly. Alex nodded. "We woke something bigger than they can control. They only know how to destroy what doesn't fit." Kaela turned back to the crew. "Then we show them a different way." The plan wasn't a plan, not really. Not the kind that would hold up in a Serathi lab or Earth Coalition war room. But inside the rift, intent mattered more than precision. Meaning carried weight. Kaela stood at the helm, her neural link connected directly to the ship's cognition web. "I need everyone linked in," she said. "Not to pilot, not to fight, to feel. Think about what this place means to you. What's taught you. Feed it into the rift. Tanek gave her a long look. That'll make us sitting targets. No, she replied. That'll make us the beacon. As the Dominion fleet closed in, the paradox powered up, not weapons but consciousness. The ship pulsed with emotion, thought, contradiction. Alex hummed a song with no rhythm. Trent drew constellations in the air from memory. Tanek poured his guilt and love and anger into the ship's code. Kaela focused on her father's face, long dead, a casualty of a failed Serathi experiment, gone before she could ask him if he ever regretted trusting the stars. The paradox lit up like a nova. The rift responded in kind. The Dominion ships emerged in formation, surrounding the anomaly, their weapons charged with cold, mathematical efficiency. The lead ship opened a channel to the rift, issuing one final warning. This anomaly is unauthorized and non-conforming to Dominion stability protocols. You have 60 seconds to withdraw. Failure to comply will result in full erasure. Kaela stood in the center of the command bridge, unblinking. She didn't send a reply. Instead, she opened herself. The rift flooded with her voice. Not her words, but her truth. Her defiance. Her wonder. Her belief that the unknown was not a threat, but a mirror, and that in that mirror, the Dominion saw only its own limits. The Serathi ships hesitated, because suddenly their systems began picking up signals. Not weapons, not threats, stories, images, emotions, dreams, broadcast from the rift directly into the minds of every crew aboard every warship. A Serathi commander fell to his knees as he saw his own childhood rewritten as a series of what-ifs. A weapons officer wept as she was shown a timeline in which she had been an artist, not soldier. The rift didn't attack. It invited. Back on the conclave spire, Vela stood in silence as live feeds from the fleet streamed across a dozen hollow panels. Chaos, confusion, and in the middle of it, the paradox glowing like a living thing. He turned to the gathered archons and counselors, all shouting, all afraid. She's giving them a choice, Veleth said. Something we never gave her. Virak sneered. She's destabilizing the entire region. No, Veleth corrected. She's giving it a future. In the rift, something shifted. The central construct bloomed like a flower, unfurling pathways of energy and thought into the surrounding void. It began copying itself, not in matter, but in idea. Seed fragments of possibility launched out like spores, embedding themselves into the consciousness of every species that observed it. Kaela staggered under the pressure. Her body felt stretched between now and forever. She felt the rift inside her, learning, adapting, evolving. She saw the Serathi, rigid and terrified. She saw humanity, broken and burning, but endlessly reaching. And she saw what came next. She didn't need to speak. The rift spoke through her. Understand, or be forgotten. The Dominion fleet disengaged. Not because they were outgunned, because they were outmatched in meaning. One by one, the warships turned away, their weapons cooling. The leaders didn't give the order. Their crews did. The youngest, the curious, the open-hearted. Kaela collapsed into the captain's chair, drenched in sweat, her breathing shallow. Alex sat beside her, hand on her shoulder. We changed something, Kaela whispered. You are something now, Alex said. More than before. The paradox thrummed gently, pulsing with a calm rhythm. Tanek looked out the viewport, where the rift now shimmered like a permanent aurora. So, what happens to us? Kaela smiled, tired but bright. We go home. But home had changed. The Dominion could not unsee what had happened. Across its core worlds, citizens began questioning the old laws. Not violently, not rebelliously, curiously. Some Serathi began studying human theories. Some humans were invited to join Serathi labs, forbidden once, but now, quietly approved. Veleth founded a joint research initiative open to all species willing to think beyond logic. And somewhere in the galactic archives, a new classification was added to the cosmic map. The Rift. Status, stable. Access, conditional. Known interactions, human-led. Outcome, Constructive. Kaela declined all interviews, all medals, all parades. Instead, she walked off the transport on Earth with a duffel bag and a single message transmitted back to Velith. It's not about who leads. It's about who listens. She disappeared after that. Some say she returned to the Rift. Some say she's teaching on a backwater moon. Others say she became something else entirely. Years passed. Not many. Just enough for scars to fade into questions, and questions to bloom into something larger. The Rift remained. Anchored, quiet, transformed. No longer a threat. Not quite a gift. More like a door left ajar in the mind of the universe, waiting patiently for those bold or strange enough to step through. It didn't demand. It didn't explain. It invited. The Serathi Dominion, once unshakable, now bent in strange and subtle ways. Not through conquest, not through rebellion, but through curiosity, a quiet revolution of minds, seated by a single human ship and its rogue commander, echoed like a ripple through the galaxy's most rigid systems. And on Earth, once a mining pit with delusions of relevance, something remarkable began to grow. A university, built into the bones of an old orbital refinery, carved from rust and ambition, powered by jury-rigged solar collectors and human stubbornness. It wasn't sanctioned by the Dominion. Not at first, but they didn't shut it down either. They watched, and eventually they joined. It was called the Institute for Postlinear Thought, though most students just called it the Bridge. Vela stood at the edge of the central atrium, watching a class in session, half Serathi, half human, a few other species trickling in. The lecturer, a woman with bright green braids and a prosthetic larynx, was animatedly explaining nonlinear causality through interpretive dance and abstract sculpture. He smiled, not because he understood it, but because he didn't have to. There were stories now, dozens, about Kaela Monroe. Some said she'd merged with the Rift. Her consciousness stretched thin across the anomaly like a new kind of operating system. Others said she was alive, hidden in the outer colonies, working on the next impossible thing. A few claimed she never existed at all, that she was an emergent myth created by a civilization desperate for meaning. But Velith knew better. He still had the message she'd sent him, and the data she'd delivered, notes on Rift communication, paradox logic, and the importance of emotional feedback in systems design, was still being analyzed by 100 Dominion teams, all of them breaking taboos just by opening the files. She had changed everything, and she had done it by refusing to fit. Back on the paradox, now enshrined at the Bridge as both a relic and an active research platform, Alex ran her fingers across the central console. It still hummed, still responded. There were new teams now, explorers, not soldiers or conquerors, but poets and programmers, composers and philosophers, all taking turns stepping into the edge of the Rift, learning, offering new ideas. Not all came back unchanged, but all came back more than they were. Alex activated the console. The interface flared to life, fractals folding into coherent symbols. The ship spoke to her now in composite language, half syntax, half intuition. Ready for next conversation? Yes, she replied, smiling. Always. The Rift had taught them one thing above all else. Reality was a story, and stories could be edited. The laws of physics weren't commandments, they were habits. Strong ones, useful ones, but not absolute. Not when viewed through the lens of emotion, context, creativity. Not when seen by a mind that refused to stop at what is. Humans had always been that mind. The Dominion, for all its glory, had stagnated. It had solved the known. But Kaela had torn a hole through knowing itself. Not out of rebellion, but because she couldn't help but ask better questions. Velith walked through the gallery wing of the Institute, stopping before a single, massive installation. A sculpture formed from melted weapon parts, fused with projection glass, woven through with living vines. It pulsed softly like it was breathing. The placard at the base read, "Paradox equation. We adapt, therefore we are." Artist, unknown. He stood there for a long time. A young Serathi student approached him, tentacles twitching with hesitation. "Ambassador Velith," she said. Do you really believe what the humans say? That logic alone isn't enough? He turned to her, thoughtful. I used to believe that logic was the peak of understanding. Now I believe it's the beginning. She frowned. Then what comes after? He looked up at the sculpture. Contradiction, emotion, mistakes, art. The student considered that for a moment. And then she smiled. Kaela Monroe reappeared exactly once. It was during a lecture on multi-stable perception broadcast through 8 dimensions simultaneously. She wasn't listed as a speaker. She just appeared in the background, a blurry silhouette with her signature black coat, sipping from a chipped mug and laughing at something no one else could hear. By the time the cameras focused, she was gone. But the ripple of her presence traveled far, and the quote she left behind, etched into the control panel of the paradox, remained. They built walls to keep us out, so we built a door they couldn't close. The Serathi Dominion still ruled the stars, but no longer alone. Not with humans in the labs, the councils, the lecture halls. Not with rift-born thought seeding new technologies that couldn't be mapped, only intuited. The universe hadn't ended in fire. It had expanded in questions. In the final scene, a new team of explorers stands at the edge of the rift. They're young, unlikely, loud. One of them carries a flute. Another has tattooed the entire quantum mechanics syllabus on their arms. Wrongly. They step onto the paradox. Alex, older now, greets them with a grin. Ready for the impossible? She asks. They cheer. The ship hums to life. And as they slip into the bloom of color and meaning and dream, a single phrase lights up across every console. Next question, please.